The cold Chicago morning was just another day in William Lancaster's life. From his penthouse office, he looked out at the steel jungle below, watching people rush through the streets, umbrellas in hand as the drizzle turned to a fine mist. The world kept moving, oblivious to his pain. Today marked 30 years since the worst day of his life. 30 years since his wife, Catherine, had died in childbirth, leaving behind a beautiful baby girl, a daughter he only got to hold once. 30 years since that same daughter vanished from the hospital, stolen in the night like a whisper lost in the wind. For 3 decades, William had searched. He had hired detectives, bribed officials, chased false leads, but every path led to a dead end. And with each passing year, hope became a cruel ghost that haunted him, always there, always out of reach. A knock on the door shattered his thoughts. "Sir, your brother is here," came the crisp voice of his assistant, Margaret. William sighed, pressing his fingers against his temples. "Send him in." The heavy mahogany door swung open, and in walked Victor Lancaster, his younger brother. Unlike William, who carried the weight of his grief in his tense shoulders and silvering hair, Victor had aged with ease. He was still the charming risk-taker, always eager to push boundaries. "William," Victor said, flashing his usual practiced smile. "How are you holding up today?" William tensed. He knew his brother well enough to sense the real motive behind the visit. Victor didn't do sentimentality, he did opportunities. "Let's skip the pleasantries," William said coldly. "What do you want?" Victor's grin faltered for a second before he pulled a chair across from William's desk. "You're still obsessed with the past, aren't you?" William clenched his jaw. "I'm not interested in your opinion." Victor sighed, leaning forward. "Listen, I came because I have an idea. One that could change this company for the better. Expansion. New investments. We've been stuck in the same routine for years. And it's because you refuse to move forward. It's time to think bigger." William shook his head. "I'm not gambling with what we've built." Victor's expression hardened. "You're so afraid of losing control that you're letting your grief strangle this company." A sharp silence followed. William stared at him, emotion flickering in his ice-blue eyes. "I lost everything once. I won't do it again." Victor exhaled sharply and stood up. "Suit yourself, brother. But sooner or later, you'll realize that you can't live in the past forever." And with that, Victor left, leaving William alone in the suffocating silence of his thoughts. On the other side of Chicago, Emma Carter was running down the street, rain soaking through her thin coat as she desperately waved at an approaching bus. "Wait, please," she called, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The driver, reluctantly, hit the brakes, and Emma scrambled inside, clutching her bag to her chest as she tried to catch her breath. She was late, again. She collapsed onto the nearest seat, her fingers trembling as she checked her phone. The address was still there. Lancaster Mansion. Her new job as a cleaning lady started today, and she couldn't afford to mess it up. Her 5-year-old son, Jamie, had spent the night coughing, his chest rising and falling in that way that made Emma's heart seize in fear. His medical bills were piling up, and the doctors had warned her that without proper treatment, his condition would only get worse. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back the tears. She had to be strong. For Jamie. As the bus rattled toward the city's wealthiest district, Emma made herself a promise. No matter what it took. She would make this work. When Emma arrived at Lancaster Mansion, she was immediately overwhelmed by its size and grandeur. The ceilings stretched high above. The chandeliers glowed softly. And everything smelled of wealth, the kind of wealth she had never known. She hurried past the towering staircases and into the kitchen, where the house manager, Mr. Callahan, was waiting. "You're late," he said, glancing at his watch. Emma bowed her head. "I'm sorry, sir. My son." "I don't want excuses," he interrupted. "Just do your job." Emma bit her tongue, nodding quickly before gathering the cleaning supplies. She knew better than to push her luck. As she worked, she moved carefully, mindful of the priceless antiques and spotless floors. She had worked in mansions before, but something about this place felt different. Maybe it was the air of sadness that lingered, as if the house itself was haunted by something unspoken. Hours passed, and Emma found herself in the office, dusting the heavy bookshelves when she heard a door creak open behind her. She turned, and for the first time, she saw him, William Lancaster. The man was even more intimidating in person, tall, broad-shouldered, his sharp features set in a mask of indifference. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. And for a brief moment, Emma felt like she couldn't breathe. She quickly looked away, focusing on wiping the desk. But in her haste, she knocked over a cup of coffee, its contents spilling across the pristine papers. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, grabbing napkins to clean up the mess. William cursed under his breath, jumping back from the spill. He grabbed his coat off the chair and reached for his handkerchief. But as he did, his eyes landed on her arm. And that was when everything changed. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. There, on the inside of Emma's forearm, was a birthmark, 3 small stars, perfectly aligned. William felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. His daughter had had that same birthmark. The memory hit him like a bullet, the tiny baby in his arms, her fragile fingers curling around his thumb, the faint but distinct birthmark on her soft skin. Emma, noticing his sudden change in expression, frowned. "Mr. Lancaster, are you all right?" William didn't answer. His mind was spinning, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. No, it had to be a coincidence. Didn't it? Emma, confused by his reaction, instinctively covered her arm with her sleeve, her stomach twisting with unease. Why was he looking at her like that? William forced himself to breathe, his entire world suddenly shifting beneath his feet. Could it be? Could this woman, his housekeeper, be the daughter he had spent 30 years searching for? He had to find out, no matter what it took. William Lancaster paced in his study long after Emma had left the office, his mind in chaos. His hands trembled as he poured himself a drink. But the whiskey did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. That birthmark, it was impossible. And yet, there it was. The memory crashed into him like a tidal wave. His wife, Catherine, had been exhausted but beaming when the nurse placed their baby girl in her arms. William had watched in awe as he traced his fingers along the tiny stars marked on her forearm, marveling at how fate had etched a piece of the cosmos onto their child. That same mark now sat on Emma Carter's arm. Could it really be her? Could the daughter he had searched for, mourned for, grieved for 30 long years, be working as a maid in his own house? The thought sent a tremor through him. He needed proof. Reaching for his phone with shaking hands, he dialed the one person he trusted with secrets too dangerous to leave in the dark. "Matthew. It's me. I need you to look into someone." His voice was hoarse, uneven. On the other end, Matthew Calloway, the private investigator who had spent years chasing dead ends in William's search for his daughter, sighed. "Still looking, huh?" Matthew's voice was skeptical. "Who is it this time? Another woman who might be her? You've done this before. William, do you really want to go down this road again?" William clenched his jaw. "I'm telling you, this time it's different." A pause. Then, reluctantly, Matthew asked, "What's her name?" "Emma Carter." The name felt foreign on his tongue. Like he shouldn't be saying it aloud. Like speaking it solidified something dangerous. "I want everything on her. Where she was born, who her parents were, where she's been. I need answers, now." Matthew hesitated. "You're sure about this? Because if you're wrong again, it's just going to reopen old wounds. And you know damn well some wounds never heal." William pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "Just find out. And be discreet. You got it." As William hung up, he knew there was no going back. If Emma was his daughter, it would change everything. And if she wasn't, then he would have to face the fact that his search had truly ended. And his daughter was never coming back. Unaware of the storm brewing around her, Emma rushed home through the cold city streets, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Jamie had been worsening over the past few days, and she had no idea how she was going to afford the next round of medication. The hospital had called earlier, warning that unless she made a payment soon, they wouldn't be able to continue his treatment. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door to her small apartment. "Mommy," a weak but excited voice greeted her, and she barely had time to brace herself before Jamie ran into her arms. She lifted him up, pressing kisses to his soft curls. But her stomach twisted when she felt how warm he was. "Baby, you're burning up," she whispered, placing her palm against his forehead. Jamie coughed, his little body shaking with the effort. Emma swallowed back her panic and forced a smile. "I'll make you some soup. Sweetheart, you need to rest." Jamie nodded sleepily as she helped him onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around his small frame. As he dozed off, Emma stepped into the tiny kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter for support. She felt trapped. The weight of bills, hospital costs, and endless worry crushed her from all sides. She had fought so hard for so long. But what if it wasn't enough? What if she lost him? The thought paralyzed her. She needed help, but she had no one to turn to. And then, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Hesitating, she picked up. "Ms. Carter? This is Dr. Patel from St. Joseph's Hospital. We need to speak with you about Jamie's condition." Emma's heart stopped. "Is it bad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before the doctor spoke. "We'll need to run more tests. But we need to discuss payment as well. If we can't arrange a financial plan by the end of the week, Jamie's treatment may be halted." Emma felt nausea rise in her throat. "I'll figure something out," she said, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the call ended, she stared at the cracked screen of her phone, feeling utterly, devastatingly helpless. And then, she made a decision. She would go back to work first thing in the morning and beg for extra shifts. She would do whatever it took to keep Jamie alive. Back at Lancaster Mansion, William hadn't slept. He had spent the night pacing, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. By morning, Matthew had sent him a file. William's hands trembled as he opened it. Birth certificate. No known father. Adopted at 3 months old. Orphanage records. It wasn't enough. He needed a DNA test. But how the hell was he going to ask Emma for that without completely scaring her off? He had to get close. Find a way into her trust. Just then, Margaret entered the office. "Sir, the new housekeeper has arrived." William's heart skipped a beat. "Send her in." A moment later, Emma walked through the door. Her head bowed, her hands gripping the hem of her uniform nervously. "Mr. Lancaster, I just wanted to apologize again for yesterday. I want to help you." Emma froze. "What?" William leaned forward, keeping his voice calm. "Your son is sick, isn't he?" Emma's eyes widened in alarm. "How do you? I overheard you on the phone." He admitted. "I want to help cover his medical expenses. No strings attached." Emma took a step back. "Why would you do that?" William hesitated. He couldn't tell her, not yet. So he lied. "Because I can." Emma stared at him, emotions flickering across her face: suspicion, desperation, and something else. Hope. Finally, her shoulders slumped. "I don't know what to say." William gave her a small, careful nod. "Say yes." And just like that, the first step toward the truth had begun. A truth that neither of them were ready for. A truth that would change everything. Emma had never felt this kind of conflicted gratitude before. As she clutched the check that William Lancaster had given her, her hands trembled. It was enough to cover Jamie's medical bills for months, something she could never have done alone. And yet, something about this didn't feel real. Why would a man like him, a man who barely spoke to anyone outside his social circle, suddenly care about a housekeeper's sick child? Her gut told her that no kindness came without a price. But she had no choice. Jamie needed this treatment. If she didn't take the money, he could die. So, she took a deep breath, clenched her jaw, and swallowed her pride. For Jamie, she would take the risk. She just prayed she wouldn't regret it. That afternoon, Emma rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. The smell of antiseptic and the hushed whispers of worried families filled the hallways. Her heart pounded as she reached the front desk. "I have the payment," she told the receptionist breathlessly. The woman looked up, surprised. "That's wonderful news, Ms. Carter. We'll process it right away." Emma exhaled in relief, her shoulders shaking. Jamie would get his treatment. He would get a chance. As she walked toward Jamie's room, she heard laughter, a sound she hadn't heard from him in weeks. When she stepped inside, she froze. William Lancaster was sitting beside Jamie's bed, holding up a tiny wooden airplane, making it zoom through the air as Jamie giggled. Emma's chest tightened. Jamie rarely warmed up to strangers. But here he was, smiling up at William with wide-eyed wonder. His tiny fingers reaching out for the plane. "Grandpa, you make it fly so good." Emma's stomach dropped. William stiffened slightly but recovered quickly. "Grandpa, huh? I don't think I'm that old. Maybe Mr. William works better." Jamie giggled again, unfazed. Emma forced herself to step forward, clearing her throat. "What are you doing here?" William turned, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to check on him," he said simply. Emma crossed her arms, her voice lowering. "Why?" William met her gaze, something flickering in his deep-set eyes. Because I want to help. Because I can. And, maybe because I should have helped a long time ago. Emma's heart skipped. She didn't know what to make of his words. But she didn't have the time to unpack them. Jamie. Sweetheart. Get some rest, okay? Mommy will be right back. Jamie pouted but nodded, snuggling deeper under the blankets. As soon as Emma and William stepped outside the room, her polite mask shattered. What are you really doing here? She demanded. William hesitated for a second before responding. Do you believe in fate? Emma blinked, thrown off by the question. What? Do you believe that sometimes, no matter what we do, the universe finds a way to bring people together? Emma's chest tightened. What are you saying? William exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy. But, I think you might be my daughter. The world stopped. Emma felt like she had just been punched in the gut. What? She breathed, her pulse roaring in her ears. I know it sounds insane. But I lost my daughter 30 years ago. She was stolen from the hospital the night she was born. And you have the same birthmark she did. Emma's legs felt weak. This couldn't be real. Her mind raced, trying to piece together a past she had no memory of. She had spent her whole life in foster care. She had never known her biological parents. And now, this stranger, this billionaire, was telling her she was his missing child? No, you're wrong, Emma whispered, shaking her head. This doesn't make sense. I was adopted when I was a baby. My mother, she wasn't rich. She wasn't part of your world. William's jaw tightened. I need to know for sure. Will you take a DNA test? Emma staggered back. Her breath hitched. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. To deny it. To pretend this wasn't happening. But then she thought of Jamie. If William Lancaster was telling the truth, Jamie had a grandfather, someone who could help him. Someone who could change his life. Could she really afford to walk away? That night, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Unable to sleep, William's words echoed in her mind. She had agreed to take the test. Tomorrow, everything could change. The possibility terrified her. What if it was true? What if the life she had struggled to build was built on a lie? What if the parents who had raised her weren't her real parents? Would she even recognize herself anymore? A small whimper pulled her from her thoughts. Jamie was crying in his sleep. Emma rushed to his side, gently stroking his damp forehead. Shush, sweetheart. Mommy's here. He stirred, mumbling something through his fevered state. Daddy's coming back? Emma's stomach twisted painfully. Jamie's father, the man who had walked out on them the moment she told him she was pregnant. No, baby. Daddy's not coming back. Jamie sniffled. But I don't want you to be alone. Mommy. Emma's throat closed. He was worried about her? She pressed a kiss to his forehead, holding back the burning tears in her eyes. She wasn't alone. She had Jamie. And now, whether she liked it or not, she might have William, too. The next morning, William met Emma at the private lab he had arranged for the test. Neither of them spoke as the doctor collected the samples. Results should be ready in 48 hours. The doctor informed them. William turned to Emma. No matter what happens, I want you to know that I'm here. For you. For Jamie. Emma bit her lip. Don't make promises you can't keep. As she turned to leave, she heard him whisper. I won't. Not this time. What do you think will happen next? Emma's world has been shaken to its core. If the DNA test confirms what William believes, her entire past will change in an instant. But is she ready for the truth? What would you do in Emma's situation? Would you take the test? Or would you walk away from a billionaire's claim? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video if you're rooting for Emma and Jamie. Subscribe now to see what happens next in this emotional journey of family loss and second chances. Emma stood outside the private lab, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. It had been 48 hours since she and William Lancaster had taken the DNA test. 48 hours of sleepless nights, of pacing the tiny apartment, of trying to convince herself that this was all a mistake. And now, she was minutes away from knowing whether the life she had built, the identity she had clung to, was nothing more than a lie. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. William was already there, waiting. His usual cool confidence was missing. Instead, he looked nervous, as if he, too, feared what they were about to discover. The doctor entered, holding a thin manila folder in his hands. Emma's heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. "Mr. Lancaster, Miss Carter." The doctor's voice was calm. "Steady. The results are in." Emma clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. William didn't move. The doctor placed the folder on the table, sliding it toward them. For a moment, neither of them reached for it. The air grew thick with anticipation, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Then, slowly, William picked it up. He flipped open the folder, his eyes scanning the document. His face went pale. Emma's stomach twisted. She knew the truth before he even spoke. William exhaled shakily and looked at her. "Emma, you're my daughter." Emma felt the floor shift beneath her. The words should have meant something, should have unlocked a hidden memory. A feeling of belonging. But all she felt was numbness. She shook her head, stepping back. No, this can't be right." William reached for her, his voice pleading. "I know this is overwhelming." "Overwhelming?" Emma let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "My entire life has been a lie. And you think I'm just overwhelmed?" William's expression twisted with pain. But Emma wasn't done. "I grew up in foster care. William, I spent my childhood waiting for a family that never came. And now, 30 years later, you show up with your millions and your perfect life and tell me that I belonged to you all along?" Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. William looked devastated, but he didn't argue. "I searched for you, Emma, every single day. I never stopped." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But how could she? Where was he when she needed someone to hold her at night? Where was he when she was crying herself to sleep in some stranger's house? Wondering why nobody wanted her. The walls of the office suddenly felt too small. Emma turned on her heel. "I can't do this," she whispered, rushing for the door. William called after her, but she didn't stop. She needed air. She needed to escape. Emma didn't realize where she was going until she ended up at the hospital. Jamie. He was the only thing grounding her right now. As she stepped into his room, she found him drawing on a piece of paper. He looked up, his tiny face breaking into a smile. "Mommy, look. I made us." Emma forced a smile as she sat beside him, looking at his drawing. It was a stick figure version of them. Emma holding Jamie's hand. with a bright sun in the background. But what made her breath hitch was the third figure beside them. An older man with gray hair. "Who's this, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jamie beamed. "That's Mr. William. He said he's going to help us." Emma's heart clenched painfully. William had been visiting Jamie while she was gone. Building a relationship. Jamie already saw him as family. She swallowed hard, brushing Jamie's hair back. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream that William had no right. But how could she take this away from Jamie? How could she look her son in the eyes and tell him that the man he was already growing attached to was a stranger she wanted nothing to do with? Jamie suddenly frowned, his small hand gripping hers. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Emma forced a smile. "I'm just tired, baby. But I'm okay." Jamie studied her for a second, then tilted his head. "Are you mad at Mr. William?" Emma's throat tightened. "It's complicated, sweetheart." Jamie's little brow furrowed. "Do you think he's bad?" Emma hesitated. Did she? Or was she just afraid of what his presence meant? As Emma sat with Jamie, a storm was brewing elsewhere. In a dimly lit office across town, Richard Lancaster, William's brother, watched the DNA results on his laptop. His jaw tightened as he read them. Emma was his niece, and that was a problem. If William accepted her, she would become the rightful heir to the Lancaster fortune. And Richard had spent too many years securing his place at the top. He wouldn't let a nobody take everything from him. Reaching for his phone, he dialed a private investigator. "Find me everything on Emma Carter. I want her weaknesses, her past, everything." A cruel smile curved his lips. If Emma thought she could just walk into their world, she was sorely mistaken. The next day, Emma received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. "Miss Carter, I believe we need to talk." A deep, smooth voice filled her ear. "Who is this?" she asked cautiously. "Richard Lancaster. Your uncle." Emma's body went cold. "What do you want?" Richard chuckled. "I want to help you." Emma didn't trust that for a second. "I don't need your help." "Oh, but you do, dear." Richard's voice turned silky. "You see, now that you're in the picture, things are going to get complicated." Emma gripped the phone tighter. "If you're trying to threaten me." "No, no, quite the opposite." Richard's voice turned dangerously calm. "I'm offering you a way out. A clean break. No drama. No unwanted attention. Just a generous compensation for your troubles." Emma's stomach churned. He was trying to pay her off. He wanted her gone. Her hands shook with rage. She may not have wanted this life, but she would not be erased like she didn't matter. "Go to hell, Richard," she hissed, hanging up. But as she stared at the phone, she knew this wasn't over. What will Emma do now? Emma just found out the truth about her past. But her uncle sees her as a threat. What should she do? Should she walk away before things get dangerous? Or should she fight for the place she never knew she had? Leave a comment below if you're rooting for Emma and Jamie. Hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe, because this battle is just beginning. And you won't want to miss what happens next. Emma sat alone in the hospital waiting room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. It had been 3 days since she learned the truth, since she found out that William Lancaster was her real father. 3 days since Richard Lancaster had tried to buy her silence. And 3 days since Jamie's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Her little boy lay in the ICU, his body weakened by the rare genetic condition that had haunted him since birth. Emma had never felt so powerless in her life. She had fought for so long, working double shifts, sacrificing everything to keep Jamie alive. And now, for the first time, she had help. William had promised that Jamie would get the best doctors, the best treatment, whatever it took. But could she trust him? Could she trust any of them? She was still trying to piece together the shattered remains of her past, and now her future was just as uncertain. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. William stood there, his face lined with exhaustion. But his eyes were filled with something she had never expected. Genuine concern. "Any updates?" William asked softly, sitting beside her. Emma swallowed hard. "No change. The doctors are doing everything they can." But her voice broke. William hesitated, then reached out tentatively, placing a hand over hers. Emma almost pulled away. Almost. But something in her heart told her not to. "I know I haven't earned your trust, Emma," William said quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me for not finding you sooner. But I need you to know, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Emma took a shaky breath. She wanted to believe him. But trust wasn't something she could give easily. She had learned the hard way that people always left. Still, she had never had a father before. Could she at least try? Before she could answer, a nurse rushed in. "Miss Carter, Jamie's oxygen levels are dropping. We need you in the ICU now." Emma's heart nearly stopped. Without another word, she ran after the nurse, William following close behind. Jamie lay in his hospital bed, struggling to breathe. His small chest rose and fell erratically, his tiny fingers clutching the sheets. Emma's vision blurred with tears. "Jamie, sweetheart, Mommy's here," she whispered, gripping his hand. The machines beeped in warning tones. The doctors rushing around her. One of them turned to her. "We need to intubate. If we don't act now, we might lose him." Emma felt like the world was collapsing around her. "Do whatever you have to do," she choked out. William stood behind her, his face as pale as a ghost. For the first time, she saw real fear in his eyes. "Emma, is there anything I can do?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Just stay, please." It was the first time she had asked anything of him. And without hesitation, he nodded. Of course. They stood there, side by side, watching as the doctors worked to save the one person who meant everything to her. Hours passed. Jamie had been stabilized, but the doctor's words haunted her. "If we don't find a compatible bone marrow donor soon, we might lose him." Emma buried her face in her hands. William placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a donor, Emma. I swear it." Emma bit her lip, fighting back sobs. "And what if we don't? What if?" She couldn't even say the words aloud. William's expression hardened. "Then I'll move heaven and earth to make sure we do. You're not alone anymore, Emma. You and Jamie, your family." She stared at him, the walls around her heart cracking just a little. For the first time, she saw not the powerful billionaire, but just a father trying to do right by his daughter. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it. Before Emma could respond, a knock on the door interrupted them. A nurse peeked in. "Miss Carter, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Emma frowned. "Who is it?" The nurse hesitated. "Richard Lancaster." Emma's stomach twisted. William stiffened beside her, his jaw clenching. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "Send him in." The door opened, and Richard stepped inside. His suit was impeccable, his expression eerily calm, but his eyes were cold as steel. "Emma, darling, I was so sorry to hear about Jamie's condition," he said smoothly. Emma's hands balled into fists. She didn't trust him, not for a second. William took a step forward, his voice sharp. "What do you want, Richard?" Richard ignored him, his gaze fixed on Emma. "I'm here to offer you a deal." Emma narrowed her eyes. "What kind of deal?" Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "A bone marrow match." Emma froze. You found one?" Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'll only give you the information under one condition." Emma's blood ran cold. "What condition?" Richard's smile widened. "Leave." The word hit her like a punch. "Leave Chicago. Leave the Lancasters. Walk away from this family. From your inheritance. Disappear." Emma's heart pounded violently. He was giving her a choice. Her son's life, or her own chance at a future with William. She felt William tense beside her. "You bastard," he hissed. But Emma barely heard him. She was staring at Richard. At the man who held the key to saving her son. "You want me to disappear?" she whispered. Richard nodded. "Agree to my terms, and I'll give you the match. Refuse, and you better pray you find another donor before it's too late." Emma's chest tightened painfully. This was it. Her son's life, or everything she had started to build with William. A single, impossible choice. The hospital corridor felt colder than ever. Emma stood motionless, Richard's ultimatum echoing in her ears. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her breath came in shallow gasps. And her heart pounded violently against her ribs. Jamie's life, her little boy, her entire world, depended on this moment. But the cost of saving him? Walking away from William forever. Her father. The only family she had ever dreamed of having. "Time is ticking, Emma," Richard said smoothly, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. His face remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "Make your decision." Emma turned to William, who stood beside her, his face ashen with anger. "Emma, don't do this," he pleaded. But what choice did she have? She had lost everything before. She wouldn't lose Jamie too. She looked Richard in the eye, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." William stiffened beside her. "Emma, no." His voice cracked, filled with desperation. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't have a choice. William, Jamie needs a donor. If I have to walk away, I will." Richard smirked, satisfied. Wise decision. He pulled out a small folder from his jacket, holding it up like a prize. "Inside this folder is the information for the bone marrow donor. Sign the agreement that you'll never claim any part of the Lancaster fortune. And you'll have it." Emma's throat closed up. The family she had longed for her entire life was slipping through her fingers. She turned to William, her vision blurry with tears. "I'm sorry." William shook his head, his own eyes shining with grief. "Don't do this for him. Emma, we'll find another way. Please." But there was no time. Jamie was getting worse every second. Emma took the folder from Richard, her hands shaking as she signed the papers. When she handed them back, Richard grinned and slipped her the donor information. "Pleasure doing business with you, dear sister." Emma turned away quickly, not sparing him another glance. Her gaze met William's one last time. Pain, anger, betrayal. She wanted to say so much. But what was there to say? So instead, she simply whispered, "Goodbye," and she ran. Emma sprinted through the hospital, her heart racing as she held the folder close to her chest. Every step felt like a knife in her soul. She had just lost her father. But none of it mattered, not if Jamie survived. She burst into the doctor's office, panting, "I have the match. Here, this person, whoever they are, please. We have to contact them now." The doctor took the folder, flipping through the pages. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his brows furrowed. "Miss Carter, there's something strange here." Emma's stomach twisted. What do you mean?" The doctor set the papers down, looking at her with hesitation. "This donor, it's William Lancaster." Emma felt the air leave her lungs. "What? Your father, William, is the perfect genetic match for Jamie. He's his best chance." Her knees buckled, and she stumbled into a chair. William, the father she just abandoned. The man she just signed away forever. Her only hope to save Jamie. And she had just walked away from him. Emma shook her head violently. "No, there has to be someone else. Some other donor." The doctor's expression was grim. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. The results are clear. Without him, Jamie may not survive." Her world shattered all over again. She had spent her entire life believing she had no family. Then she found a father, only to lose him again. And now, Jamie's life depended on him. She had to go back. Even if William hated her. Even if Richard used it against her. Even if it meant begging. She would do whatever it took. She had no other choice. Emma found William outside the hospital, standing alone. His broad shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into tight fists. She swallowed hard. "William?" He turned slowly, his eyes cold and unreadable. "You made your choice. Emma, what do you want now?" She winced. Every word felt like a dagger to the heart. "I made a mistake." William laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Emma, you threw me away for a man who has done nothing but hurt you." Tears fell down her cheeks. But she didn't care. She dropped to her knees, desperation spilling from her in waves. "Jamie is dying, William, and you're the only one who can save him." William froze. "What? You're his match. You're the donor. Without you, he won't make it." The anger melted from William's face, replaced by shock and anguish. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. "Jamie, he's my grandson." Emma sobbed. "Yes, and I know I don't deserve to ask you this. But please help him." William stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he walked past her and into the hospital. Emma collapsed in relief. Hours passed. William underwent the procedure, donating the bone marrow Jamie needed. Emma sat by Jamie's bedside, her fingers brushing through his soft curls. She watched the monitors beep steadily, his small chest rising and falling in peace. She had been so close to losing him. But William saved him. When William finally entered the room, Emma stood quickly. Their eyes met, and for the first time in weeks, there was no anger, only understanding. "He's okay," Emma whispered. William exhaled deeply, his face flooding with relief. Then, without hesitation, he wrapped Emma in a tight embrace. Emma broke down. clinging to him like a lifeline. "I'm so sorry." "I know, sweetheart. I was scared. I thought I had to do it alone." William gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears. "You're not alone anymore, Emma. You never were." She nodded, a new hope filling her chest. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting for Jamie. She was fighting for a family. And now, she finally had one. What would you have done? Would you have walked away like Emma did? Or trusted William sooner? Leave your thoughts in the comments and let us know what you would have done. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more heart-wrenching stories like this one. Because sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. That day, the sky was gray and heavy, mirroring the storm inside Emma's heart. She stood outside the courthouse, hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Today would decide everything: the end of her father's freedom, his reputation, and perhaps her relationship with him forever. And the cruelest part? Emma was the one who put him there. 2 days ago, Emma was sitting beside Jamie's hospital bed, gently brushing his hair back as he slept. Her phone rang, the number unknown. "Hello?" A deep, urgent male voice responded. "Emma Carter? This is Detective Walker. You need to hear this immediately." Emma frowned, her pulse quickening. "What is this about?" There was a pause. Then, "It's about the truth behind your disappearance 30 years ago. And the man responsible is your father, William Lancaster." Emma froze. "No, that's impossible." Her stomach twisted, her vision blurred. William, the man who had searched for her for decades. The man who had saved Jamie's life. The man she had finally begun to trust. And now, she was being told that he was the one who orchestrated her disappearance. Emma rushed to Detective Walker's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. A thick file sat in front of her. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open. Inside were classified documents, old reports, and a letter. A letter written by her mother, the woman she had never met. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come out. William Lancaster, the man you call father, is the very reason you were taken from me. He orchestrated everything to protect his fortune. He never wanted you to exist." Emma felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She pushed back from the desk, shaking her head violently. "No, that can't be true. He spent years searching for me. Why would he do that if he wanted me gone?" Detective Walker sighed heavily. "Because people change, Emma. He regretted what he did. But it doesn't erase the crime. And now, you have a choice to make." Emma stared blankly, her body numb. How could a man who seemed so desperate to find her be the same man who once tried to erase her from existence? Emma walked into the Lancaster estate, perhaps for the last time. William was sitting in his office, sipping a glass of whiskey. When he saw her, his eyes darkened. "I suppose you've heard." Emma's voice shook. "Tell me it isn't true." William sighed, setting his glass down. Then, after a long pause, "It's true. I did it, and it was the greatest mistake of my life." Emma felt like someone had ripped the air from her lungs. "Why?" she whispered. William exhaled heavily, his gaze pained. "Because I was weak. I was selfish. I was afraid of losing everything. So I made the worst decision a man could ever make. And I've spent every day since regretting it." Emma clenched her jaw, tears forming in her eyes. "But that doesn't erase what you did." She pulled a court summons from her coat pocket. William stared at it, his face unreadable. Then, after a long silence, "So, you're turning me in?" Emma's voice cracked. "I have to." A sad, heartbroken smile crossed William's face. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "I understand, and I'm proud of you." Emma's knees nearly gave out. But she didn't let herself fall apart. She turned and walked away, leaving her past behind, but carrying a shattered heart with her. The courtroom was silent, tension thick as a storm cloud. William Lancaster stood before the judge, handcuffed, awaiting his fate. Emma sat in the front row, her nails digging into her palm. The verdict was read, "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. William turned to look at her, his face calm, as if he had already made peace with his fate. There was no anger, no hatred, just acceptance. And then, a single tear slipped down his cheek. Emma's vision blurred. She had lost her father once as an infant. And now, she was losing him again. But this time, by her own hand. Do you think Emma did the right thing? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Like this if you support Emma's strength. And subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Because sometimes, the hardest thing in life is choosing between justice and love. The prison gates loomed ahead like a cold steel reminder of everything that had been lost. Emma sat in the back of the car, staring out at the dull gray building that now held her father captive. It had been 6 months since William Lancaster was sentenced. 6 months since she had watched him stand before the judge and accept his fate with silent dignity. 6 months since she had walked out of that courtroom, her heart feeling both victorious and shattered at the same time. But now, she was here to say goodbye. A week ago, Emma had received the call. The warden's voice was grave. "Ms. Carter, I'm sorry to inform you, but your father is dying." Emma had felt the world stop spinning. "What?" she whispered. The warden sighed. "Liver failure. It's advanced. He doesn't have much time. If you want to see him, now is the time." Emma had closed her eyes, memories flashing through her mind like a painful slideshow. The man who had once tried to erase her existence. The same man who had spent 3 decades searching for her. The father she had sent to prison. And now, she was about to lose him forever. Now, as the guards led her down the dimly lit hallways of the prison, Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Was it anger? Was it grief? Or was it simply the weight of everything left unsaid? The door to the prison infirmary creaked open. And there he was. William Lancaster, the once powerful business mogul, lay in a hospital bed, frail, thin, and almost unrecognizable. His golden hair had turned white. His once sharp blue eyes dulled with exhaustion. And yet, when he saw her, a small, weak smile crossed his lips. "Emma," he rasped. Emma froze. For a moment, she was a child again, yearning for a father's love. But then reality came crashing back. This man had caused her so much pain. And yet, he had also saved her son's life. He had betrayed her, yet searched for her. He had been both her greatest enemy and the father she had longed for her entire life. Emma stepped forward, hesitantly taking the chair beside his bed. William exhaled shakily, his fingers trembling as he reached for her hand. For a moment, she almost pulled away. But something in his eyes, regret, sorrow, love, made her pause. "I know I don't deserve to ask this. William whispered, his voice weak. Emma stayed silent, her hands gripping the chair. William sighed, closing his eyes. But I need to tell you the truth before I go. Emma's breath caught. The truth? She repeated. William nodded, his fingers tightening slightly around hers. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. I tried to erase you from my life, because I was afraid. Because I was a coward. Because I let greed dictate my choices. And when I realized what I had done, it was too late. His voice cracked, his body shaking from the effort. I spent 30 years searching for you. But not just because of guilt. I searched for you because I loved you. Because despite everything, I never stopped being your father. Emma felt tears welling up. But she refused to let them fall. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to tell him that love wasn't enough. That love didn't erase the years of suffering. But then, William reached for something under his pillow. A small, wrinkled envelope. He held it out to her, his hands shaking. What is this? Emma asked, hesitating. William smiled weakly. My last gift to you. Emma slowly took the envelope, her heart pounding. Inside, there were legal documents. Emma's eyes widened as she skimmed through them. And then, her breath hitched. What is this? She whispered. William let out a soft, broken chuckle. Everything, my entire estate, my wealth, my company, it's all yours now. Emma stared at him, stunned. Why would you do this? William sighed. Because I want you to have what was stolen from you. I want you to use it, to help others. To do good. To be everything I wasn't. Emma's hands shook as she held the papers. For years, she had imagined justice. But she never expected this. I don't need your money. William smiled sadly. It's not for you. He nodded toward the photo on her locket, the picture of her son. Jamie. It's for him. For his future. For a chance to live without struggle. Emma's tears finally spilled over. Because for the first time, she saw something in William Lancaster that she had never seen before. A father. Not perfect. Not redeemed. But a father nonetheless. A nurse appeared at the door. It's time, Ms. Carter. Emma wiped her tears. Standing slowly, William reached for her hand one last time. Emma, do you think you could ever forgive me? Emma swallowed hard. She didn't know if she could. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But as she squeezed his frail fingers, she whispered, "Goodbye, Dad." And that, for now, was enough. A week later, Emma stood before a crowd of reporters outside the Lancaster estate. The cameras flashed, the world watching as she stepped up to the microphone. My name is Emma Carter. And today, I am taking over what was once my father's empire. Not for greed, not for power, but to create something better. The crowd murmured in surprise. Emma took a deep breath. Today, I am announcing the launch of the Lancaster Foundation. A foundation dedicated to helping orphans, single mothers, and children battling illness, just like my son once did. A reporter raised his hand. Why would you do this? Why not destroy the company that caused you so much pain? Emma smiled. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about breaking the cycle. And I refuse to let my father's mistakes define the future. As she stepped away from the podium, she looked up at the sky. Maybe, just maybe, somewhere up there, her father was watching. And for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Emma Carter stood at the entrance of Lancaster Industries. The towering glass skyscraper that once represented everything she despised. Her father's empire. Her greatest inheritance. And now, her greatest burden. It had been 3 months since William Lancaster's funeral. 3 months since she had inherited his entire fortune. Not because she wanted it, but because he had left it all to her as his final apology. And for 3 months, she had tried to rebuild what her father had left behind. Tried to turn a corrupt empire into something good. Tried to prove to herself that she was more than just her father's daughter. But now, everything was about to crumble. Emma stepped into the boardroom, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The room was filled with men in expensive suits. Their faces hard, unreadable. At the head of the table sat Gregory Sloane, her father's former business partner, and the man who had been waiting for her to fail. Gregory smiled coldly, folding his hands. "Ms. Carter, you're late." Emma forced a tight smile, setting down her files. "I didn't realize I was being timed." "Mr. Sloane." A chuckle rippled through the board members. Gregory's smile didn't falter. "Shall we get started? We have important matters to discuss." Emma exhaled slowly, bracing herself. She had prepared for this meeting. She had spent weeks reviewing numbers, strategizing, doing everything in her power to keep Lancaster Industries from collapsing. But as Gregory cleared his throat, she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Because something felt wrong. "Ms. Carter," Gregory began, "there has been a change in our financial structure." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Gregory slid a folder across the table. Emma hesitated before opening it. And when she did, her entire world shattered. Her hands shook as she scanned the documents. Millions, no, billions, had been withdrawn from company accounts. Investors had pulled out. Contracts had been cancelled. The empire she had spent months trying to fix was already collapsing beneath her feet. Emma looked up, her vision blurry with shock. "What is this?" she whispered. Gregory's smile widened. "It's exactly what it looks like. Ms. Carter, your company is bankrupt." The words hit like a punch to the gut. No, this wasn't possible. She had checked everything. She had fought so hard to turn things around. She had believed that maybe, just maybe, she could rewrite the legacy her father left behind. But Gregory, he had been planning this all along. Emma's chest tightened with realization. "You did this." Gregory sighed, feigning disappointment. "Oh, Ms. Carter, I didn't do anything. You were simply unqualified for the job." A slow chuckle spread through the board members. Emma felt rage boil inside her. But more than that, she felt defeat. The board voted unanimously to remove her as CEO. Security escorted her from the building. The press was already outside. Cameras flashing. Reporters shouting questions she couldn't process. Emma walked through them in a daze. Her mind numb. She had lost. She had lost everything. That night, Emma sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the pile of unpaid hospital bills stacked on the kitchen counter. Jake, her son, her world, her reason for fighting so hard. And now, she had nothing left to fight with. Tears burned in her eyes. She had promised to give Jake a better life. She had promised to change the future. And yet, she was right back where she started. Alone. Broke. Lost. A soft knock on the door startled her. Emma wiped her tears. exhaling shakily before opening it. To her surprise, an elderly woman stood there, holding a yellowed envelope in her hands. "Miss Carter?" Emma nodded slowly. "I was instructed to give this to you." The woman placed the envelope in Emma's hands before disappearing down the hall. Confused, Emma closed the door and carefully opened the letter. Her hands trembled as she read. "Emma, if you are reading this, then I have failed you again. I know I cannot undo the past. But I still have one final lesson to teach you. The world will try to break you. But you are stronger than you know. When I lost you, I spent years drowning in my mistakes. I let power define me. And it destroyed everything I loved. Don't make the same mistake I did. You don't need Lancaster Industries to build something great. You don't need my name to change the world. You already have everything you need, because you have a heart that refuses to give up. So don't give up, Emma. Not now. With all my love. William Lancaster." Emma sank to the floor, clutching the letter to her chest. Her father had known. He had known this would happen. And yet, even in his final moments, he had believed in her. Believed she was strong enough. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. Emma wiped her tears. Taking a deep breath, she looked at the hospital bills. She looked at the letter in her hands. And then, she stood up. She had lost everything before. But she had rebuilt her life once. And she would do it again. Not for her father. Not for his company. But for herself. For Jake. For the future she refused to give up on. Have you ever felt like everything was falling apart? Like you had nothing left to fight with? Emma's story teaches us something important. Life will knock you down. But you have the power to stand back up. Would you keep fighting in Emma's shoes? Leave a comment and let us know your thoughts. Like this if you believe in second chances and new beginnings. Subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Because sometimes, losing everything is just the beginning. Emma Carter stood at the edge of Lancaster Park. The sun setting in a brilliant array of orange and gold across the Chicago skyline. Her son, Jake, laughed as he ran through the grass. His small hands outstretched as he chased a butterfly. It had been a year since everything fell apart. A year since she had lost everything. Since she had been betrayed, humiliated, and left with nothing but her son and a pile of debts. But today, she stood taller, stronger, unbroken. Today, she stood as the woman she was always meant to be. After being forced out of Lancaster Industries, Emma had faced the darkest period of her life. She had no company, no money, no connections, but she had one thing. Her father's final words. You don't need Lancaster Industries to build something great. You don't need my name to change the world. You already have everything you need, because you have a heart that refuses to give up. She had clung to those words like a lifeline, repeating them to herself every night when the doubts crept in. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to rebuild. She started small, a consulting firm, helping struggling businesses recover. She used the knowledge she had gained from working under her father. She helped women-owned businesses, family companies on the verge of collapse, and entrepreneurs with big dreams but no direction. At first, no one believed in her. They saw her as the disgraced heiress, the woman who had failed at Lancaster Industries. But Emma didn't care. She kept working, kept proving herself. And one by one, they started believing in her too. Within a year, Her firm had grown into something greater than she ever imagined. Carter Solutions was now one of the most trusted consulting firms in Chicago, helping small businesses thrive instead of exploiting them. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. One crisp autumn morning, Emma returned to Lancaster Industries. Not as a defeated CEO, not as William Lancaster's daughter, but as a leader of her own empire. Gregory Sloane, the man who had betrayed her, sat in his office smug and arrogant, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Emma walked in, confidence radiating from her every step. "Ms. Carter, what are you doing here?" Gregory sneered, leaning back in his chair. Emma placed a thick file on his desk. Inside were documents proving years of fraud, backdoor deals, and illegal activities he had orchestrated to destroy her father's company. Gregory paled. "How did you?" Emma smiled. "I learned from the best." In the months that followed, Gregory was investigated, arrested, and sentenced for financial crimes. And Lancaster Industries? Emma didn't take it back. Instead, she turned it into a foundation for struggling businesses, helping people who, like her, had once lost everything and needed a second chance. Because Emma had finally realized something important. Power meant nothing. Money meant nothing. But impact? Helping people? That was everything. Jake's health had improved, thanks to the new treatments Emma could afford. He had fully recovered. The little boy who once lay weak in a hospital bed, wondering if he'd ever run again, was now stronger than ever. One day, after school, he ran to Emma, his face glowing with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I won the science fair," he exclaimed, waving a small golden trophy. Emma knelt, hugging him tightly. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming pride. She had fought so hard to give him a life where he could dream, succeed, and grow without fear. And she had won, not with power, not with revenge, but with perseverance, love, and the courage to start over. One evening, Emma stood in front of a packed auditorium, preparing to give a speech. It was her first major keynote address, a moment she had once dreamed of but never thought possible. As she stepped onto the stage, she took a deep breath, looking at the crowd, business leaders, entrepreneurs, women looking for inspiration, and at the very back of the room, Jake, sitting proudly with a sign that read, "Go, Mom." Emma smiled and began. "A year ago, I lost everything. I was betrayed, humiliated, and left with nothing. But what I've learned is that sometimes, losing everything is exactly what we need to truly find ourselves." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I spent so much of my life thinking success was about money, power, and control. But true success isn't about what we have. It's about who we choose to be. It's about refusing to stay down when the world knocks you over. It's about standing up, not just for ourselves, but for the people who depend on us." So to anyone out there who feels like their world is falling apart, know this: you are stronger than you think. You are capable of rising again. And your greatest success might just come after your greatest fall. The room erupted into thunderous applause. And for the first time in her life, Emma knew she had won, not against her enemies, not against the people who doubted her, but against the version of herself that once thought she wasn't enough. Emma's journey is one of resilience, courage, and the power of second chances. Have you ever felt like life knocked you down so hard that you didn't know if you could stand back up? Emma's story proves that no matter how many times we fall, we can always rise again. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to start over? What helped you push forward? Like this video if you believe in new beginnings and never giving up. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the strength within us. Because remember, your story isn't over. The next chapter is waiting for you. And it's going to be your greatest one yet.